prevention was a big part of that. So there are policies that have been developed, and our role is to help develop those and implement them, keep them updated, as well as recommend training and implementation tools to clubs. So those of you that aren't on the committee joining us, this is for you, and hopefully you can take this back to your clubs to understand the importance of training in this area. So our final role is to investigate incidents that are presented to the district, and we'll get into what those are a little bit later. The committee members are listed there. So there's some of us from Canada, some from the US, and we've put this presentation together today, hopefully to help everyone. So what is abuse? So again, I'm not going to read verbatim, but abuse obviously is action or inaction that causes injury and then harmful treatments. So it includes sexual, mental, physical, and exploitation of vulnerable persons. So again, historically, this abuse and prevention came about mostly because of Rotary's involvement with youth and youth exchange. So in that regard, the youth exchange program has its own set of rules and policies that are very strict and stringent. And so we've
testing one, two.
In general, we've come to adopt those for clubs on a broader spectrum, because it's not just youth who are vulnerable, but there's other sectors of the population that are vulnerable as well. So this is all to help protect the vulnerable persons within our communities. So again, abuse can be physical abuse, which is pretty self-explanatory. Sexual abuse, while it may sound easy to understand, there is, more than just the touching. It's now, providing or receiving photographs or images, that include and chats and emails and texts. So it's not just actions. So it's other things as well. So it's a broader spectrum. And then there's emotional or verbal abuse, which again, it's using intimidating language that isolates people or ridicules them, even cursing. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. So, and then we would get into harassment, which is communication or conduct intended to be construed as an attack of the dignity of the person. And it's attacking, could be their color, race, national origin, religious beliefs, ethnicity, age. So there's numerous ways that a person can be harassed, and the conduct or communication would include verbal or written remarks, statements, questions, gestures, jokes, and practical jokes. So again, I would have to say our club was, probably not the best in this regard. Back in the day, the sergeant at arms, some of the jokes that were told, they're not acceptable, and they aren't now, but this is the progression we've had within our club for sure. So again, people just have to be careful of what their actions or conduct may offend. So the inappropriate behaviors. So I've kind of already gone over some of them. So it's, it's conduct or written communication, even nonverbal communication can be inappropriate. And it's behavior that is unwelcome and offensive to others. So the inappropriate behavior within a sexual abuse is clearly here. So any touching of a sexual or other intimate parts of a person for gratification. Also the providing or receiving photographs or images depicting sexual or other intimate parts of the person. Any communication in any form, so telephone, email, text, chats, including that include explicit language concerning sexual or other intimate body parts, sexually oriented actions, or similar matters that are objectively oriented towards a person's sexual gratification. Any request for sexual favors, obviously. Some of this refers to youth and host families because we have borrowed these policies from the youth exchange committees. So
hey, Bernie,
yes.
if I could just add something there that I think is important, and it's not necessarily the consciousness or the opinion or the belief of the person making the comment or putting their hand on the person's shoulder. It's all about the person that's receiving it and what they believe that means. So, whether it be an email joke, and it's not about, the 5 people that read the email joke and it was, they brushed it off. It's about that 1 or 2 people that read that email joke and took it the wrong way, or the comment that was made, or the putting the arm around the person's shoulder, or, that's important for all of us to understand is it's not about how we perceive it. It's about how the victim or the person that's receiving it perceives it.
Definitely. And thank you for that. And yes, that's so true. And again, taking from the youth exchange program, those kids come together from, and are in our communities. They come from all around the world, different cultures. And, some are huggers and others aren't. And if someone's uncomfortable with hugging as a gesture, we have to be conscious of that, right? So it's definitely in the it's how it's perceived by the person, not the person receiving it.
Right. Is it correct to ask if somebody would like a hug? I mean, would that be considered harassment, or would that be asking permission? And certainly with, because if you have a student in your home, sometimes you want to hug them if you're a hugger. So
yeah,
you say, can I give you a hug? And would that be acceptable, do you think?
I certainly do, because then it's, and you ask the question in a non-threatening way, and, say we're huggers, and how are you okay with that if I hug you or not? I mean, this pandemic is kind of, I do that now. So if I've had to do it to my mom. So, when we started coming out of it, it's like, Mom, are you hugging yet? Right. So I think it's definitely appropriate to ask.
And specifically with younger kids, it's very important to make sure that you have an understanding of what they're willing to accept. I know with my high school students specifically, I would ask if they would want a handshake, high five, or a hug.
Give them options. Good
And,
idea.
and, you know, and sometimes it was a handshake, sometimes it was a quick high five, or just hit with knuckles, or some would rather have a hug. It just depends.
Okay, and then Mike, is this where you're going to step in to talk about the prevention of harassment? Or is it still me?
I think that's you. I'm more on the reporting part, which is coming up
Okay.
a little later.
All right. So again, first time doing the presentation for all those that are joining us. So again, steps we can take to prevent harassment. So we're hoping that all clubs will make all their members aware of of the prevention and training that's available. So we also can do things within our club. So we want to make sure that our activities are delivered in safe environments, and that training is made again to clubs, members and volunteers, and that we are put people in a position where that if they do witness something or become aware of something, that they can report it to the club committee if there is one. So again, our club does have a committee, and just the responsibilities of that committee are to ensure every new member, and then every new member does the volunteer, completes a volunteer assessment form upon joining, and a background check. So that's what our club does. And if there was an incident, then the committee would become aware of it, and we'll talk about how that, what should happen to that information in the future. But again, a lot of this information from today and for members, there's some great training available at RI, and we'll talk about that to the end. So the district has an abuse and harassment and prevention policy, of which this is part of it here. And there's
Bernie,
recommendations.
excuse me a minute. Can you make your screen bigger? Can you click your box up in the right and make it take up the screen?
Sure. Hang on.
Go to the bottom, very bottom, where it says the little screen at the very bottom, the little screen at the very bottom, and click that. Bottom right.
Hang on. Sorry.
Can I suggest you go to slideshow?
Slideshow, yeah.
Yeah, okay, hang on.
In your
On
PowerPoint.
the
just
white
go to
line there,
slideshow.
the top,
Yes, I'm
right
I'm
above
trying-
you. Right there.
oh.
There you go.
Okay, and you're going to start from the current slide on the left-hand side. Start from the, no, at the very top there. It says, whoops, you lost it.
Go back to
Slideshow,
slideshow.
go to slideshow,
Yeah,
click that. On the right-hand side now, in that box, it says from current slide.
It's right there, right?
No. See, it opens that
Yes.
up.
yes, got it.
There, you got it.
Okay. Thank you.
There.
Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. So, going back to, sorry.
That's better.
The recommendations. So each Rotary Club is strongly encouraged to adopt the district's abuse, neglect, and harassment prevention policy. So it's available on the district website. And each club is also encouraged to provide members and volunteers with training. And again, the training, like I said, I've done it myself from the RI website. It's quite good. We've adopted some of it within today's presentation. So certainly, and it doesn't really take all that long. And each club is encouraged to designate a member or a committee to provide the training, have the information available, and be basically the club, the person in the club who knows where to go. So again, each club should make sure that the environments they create allow people to quickly, confidently, and confidentially report incidences, because that's the most important thing, because we can't second guess ourselves within any of this, and that's why the committees have been set up. So again, club programs, activities, and events should be planned and organized to minimize the potential for any incidences. So again, and going back to the youth exchange, anything we do within youth exchange, we always try and make sure that there's at least 2 responsible adults, with the kids at any time. It's just, something that we try and do. I mean, it's not possible all the time, because if you're taking a kid somewhere, you're not going to have 2 people driving them, but it's just something to think about, that creates a safer environment for everybody. Yeah, and then I think that's all I want to go. And then, so what happens now if there is an incident that happens? So I'm going to let Mike take it from here.
Right,
Right.
right. Thanks, Bernie. Now that we know what constitutes it, some of the salient points in the next couple of slides are that, because there's many different due dates and processes we're going to talk about, but the main thing is, and I think something Marcel mentioned before, the clubs didn't always address these before. Now, if there is any type of behavior and you witness it, you have no choice. You must report it. We're not asking you to investigate it. You have to report it. Don't go around and start talking about it with everybody. Report it. And you only have a certain amount of time to do that. You have 48 hours to report it. And later on, we're going to talk about a form that we should be using, that we could use. But who do you report it to? Well, you report it to what we call the DAPC chairperson, who is Mark Walling, any of the members, which we mentioned before who they were, the governor and the president. And if the governor receives it herself or himself, they have to send it to Mark Walling, and then he sends it to all the members. So in a quick fashion, everybody's knowing that something is amiss, something's gone wrong. Now, when the Rotary takes over, they have 72 hours, and they have to report it to talk about getting kind of formal here. They have to report it to the district insurer, because we could be sued, to the legal counsel, and to the board of directors. So we have 48 hours to report it, and another 72 hours from then to get all the people informed about what's going on. And at the same time, if you recognize that it's a civil or criminal problem, you should report that immediately. In fact, if a crime is suspected, you probably should go there first, or concurrently with reporting it to the governor. Again, you only have 72 hours. Another kind of a neat element in this, not neat, but it covers everything, is that if you are the one that's reporting, you should confirm that someone else went to law enforcement. If they said you reported this, oh, we'll go to law enforcement. No, you have to confirm it. So you have some responsibility if you're going to report this, and you don't have any leeway about not reporting it. At the same time, throughout the whole process, we have to guarantee the confidentiality to the reporter as much as possible, because at some time or another, it may come out that you have to cooperate and your name might come out. But in the meantime, everything is confidential. Now, what happens after that? Well, if law enforcement declines, we still have, we, meaning the DAPC, our committee, has to follow up on it anyway. Because if it's found valid, at least under our rules, not criminal, but valid, we have to take action of removing that person who is considered the perpetrator from that activity and from away from the person who might have been harassed or whatever. So now, if it's inconclusive, which it could happen, our committee has to make sure certain safeguards are implemented if they're not already in place to ensure that that person feels comfortable continuing on, the person who was allegedly harassed. Now, what happens after that? Well, we're going to be naming an investigator to look into this, our committee. And they have, after they gather all the facts, they have 3 weeks to report that to our committee, a written report, final investigation of all of that. Now, if you take a look at the next slide, that's our reporting form. It's called the Rotary Sexual Harassment, Abuse, and Neglect Complaint Form. And I think we skipped a page there. We have the first page. Yes, okay, here we go. If you believe that another person has been subjected to it, and it goes on, again, you might want to review the definitions that are in our handbook. You have to complete this form, and it gives your name, contact information, name of the alleged victim or victims, name of the harasser or the abused alleged harasser. Then you try to give as much information as possible, just like anytime you're reporting something amiss, including dates, times, and names of witnesses. Give as much information as possible. It doesn't all have to fit on this form because it says attach additional if needed. Give as much as possible. In fact, if you have like emails or documents which support your allegations, describe it or say in here 4 pages attached. Make sure it's complete so that the people who get this, who's going to be the governor and our particular committee headed by Mark Walling, we need all this information to go forward. And the next page is really kind of just the conclusion of that, where I think we just you just sign it and give your name and give the assurance of confidentiality. The other thing that comes in here, which is a good point, is retaliation. If anybody is retaliating against a person who reports this, they're in deep doo-doo as well. I don't think that's written in the memo that way. There's no doo-doos in there.
I saw it. It was there.
It is there. There's a
Deep doo-doo.
deep doo-doo. But in any case, you have to, if somebody reports it, you don't want to think that you're going to be retaliated against. So what we want to do is assure people that do report this information, there's no retaliation involved. And okay, well, thanks, Marcel, for
All of the above.
for bringing it. Dodo, doo-doo, and all that.
I ask one question.
Certainly.
Yeah, I can see sexual harassment and abuse, but I'm worried about the definition of the word neglect. I think my wife I'd be suffering that all the time. But the point I'm saying here is that's got such a broad sort of perspective of what neglect is. I'm having troubles with it.
Well, I think, just let me step in on this a minute. The word harassment indicates some sort of active thing that is done. Neglect could be being present when someone else is harassing a person and not intervening to stop that harassment. That could be inaction. I really believe that's the use of the word neglect here. It's focused on the whole definition of what inappropriate behavior is, and you can be reported not only for participating in that, but failing to stop it when you could have. I think that's where the word neglect comes in. I'm seeing Bernie nodding. So anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Bernie, can you go back to page 1 and let us look at that too, to see if it mentions neglect? Page 1 of, yes, of this. It does. And was neglect defined anywhere in our policy? Do you remember?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
Okay, so
Okay,
the
you'll
basis
have
of
to
this,
look at
the
that.
basis of this is that it's simply a neglect in terms of the reporting or the concept of sexual harassment and abuse. It's not just somebody ignoring somebody. Okay.
Right. I mean, the best example that I think of is, Penn State University. You had this revered coach.
Mhm.
He didn't engage in any harassment himself, but he was aware of it and did nothing.
Okay, that's a good explanation right there.
You know, when I used to teach this where I worked, and we used to bring up hostile work environment, which of course, hostile work environment is you're there all the time, but you could have that come up in meetings where a person says, I just don't feel comfortable at some of our meetings. I think that they might have to report that too. That would be neglect of the people running the meetings to take that into consideration. Wouldn't you think, Mark?
Oh, I don't know. That's kind of a gray area. I mean, I really think what we're talking about is if someone is victimized in any way, there's an obligation to report that, whether no matter what how you become aware of the abuse. I really think that's what it comes down to.
Marcel was on unmute for a minute there, and I was wondering if he wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I got the policy up. I searched. There is no definition of neglect.
I didn't see it.
Okay.
But I think in one of the breakout scenarios, it talks about being at a meeting and a presenter is being ridiculed and heckled and made to feel uncomfortable. And I think that's where the neglect, if the president of that group or no one steps up to try and stop that would, I would consider neglectful behavior. Therefore, that would have to be investigated and responded by this committee.
I agree.
Very good. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's my section on the reporting. Is there any questions?
I think the only thing I thought about, Mike and Bernie and the rest of the committee, was as I was kind of processing some scenarios while you guys were talking, the one thing to keep in mind is there may be multiple agencies involved with this and not just law enforcement, depending on where the context of the actual harassment may have occurred. Meaning, almost every organization, every place that, has any kind of bylaws, rules, and regulations now has to have some kind of a policy on harassment and investigation. So I was thinking of, if we were in, if Rotary and some of our clubs are very involved with Interact, it's not necessarily youth and exchange. There could be an event. I'm thinking one on our one of our school campuses, a senior breakfast in which the Interact and the senior citizen breakfast, where the Interact and the Rotary Club work together on a school district in the school to put on a senior breakfast for the local community. And if an incident happens there, you're going to have not only Rotary's DAC committee involved, possibly the law enforcement, but the school district itself has a policy for harassment and the need for it to be investigated. And I would guess Interact would also have a policy for harassment and the need for it to be investigated. So there's going to be some coordination of what that is going to look like.
Definitely. Good point.
So I guess it's up to me to do the breakout sessions. So I'm going to do them differently than I think some of the other sessions have, for two reasons. One, we don't have the volume of people that some of the other groups had. And, we prepared for me to do the breakout sessions, and I would have to be in each one of those little breakout sessions in order to run this. So I think we're just going to do it as sort of a whole group. And it's important to emphasize that harassment is not and will not be tolerated by Rotary, not only by policy, but I think it's pretty much been a commitment by all of the leaders of Rotary, and that it's not only not going to be tolerated, there's going to be prompt investigation reports of harassing behavior. And it's important that it has to be a foundation for an inclusive environment where everyone feels safe. We're going to practice a couple of these sessions. I have a couple statements. It's actually these four were taken from the training. And as I was running through these, I thought about Bernie, next time maybe if there's a way, or Duncan, if we do another one of these, we could put the scenario up and hide the answers. So I'd like everybody to just kind of keep that in mind. Don't read the answers right now, because I think it's important to have a conversation about the scenario first before the answer came up. But I thought about that late last night. So scenario one is a female member of the club tells you, her club president, so we're all acting as club president, that she was inappropriately touched by a man at a club event. She does not want to tell the board or local authorities about it. What is your best response to this person? So I'm going to open it up on the floor and try not to read the answers, because one of those three is the correct answer. Before we get to that, what do you think your response should be? Marcel?
I actually have taken the view that any touching is inappropriate as a man.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that even the question has is that I have to exercise some judgment about what's inappropriate or not appropriate. And I will not touch I will not touch anyone because I think all touching could be inappropriate. And that's part of where it starts. Because people say, oh, I'm just patting you on the back. Well, yeah, but the back is too close to the lower back, is too close to the buttocks, too close to the thighs, too close to, and on I go. So, and similarly, I think we have to get into a mindset of just, so informal jostling in a crowded room is a lot different than any touching when it's just you and me in a room. So that's part of my concerns about just even the setup on this. But my reaction these days is just about any touching is inappropriate, especially pandemic concerns.
Absolutely, Marcel. The other thing to keep in mind too is it's also not about us. It's not about whether or not we think it's inappropriate, because it doesn't really matter if you and I think it's inappropriate. But if a female member comes up to us and says that she was inappropriately touched, we don't get a chance to judge that. We need to, to move forward with it. So, I mean, I think that that's something that is definitely a mindset change, is that it really doesn't matter how we feel what something is inappropriate. If the individual says it's inappropriate, we have to take it as being inappropriate. But what would you say to her?
That's even after she said, no, I don't want to go beyond this. So you have to legally say, I'm sorry, you've already told me, so I have a responsibility to follow through.
You just have to remember though too, it's as Tim says, it's when the person comes to you and complains, because people from Europe, for example, there's a lot of hugging and touching, and they even kiss each other in certain countries, men on men. So you have to be very careful on how you observe it. And as Tim says, as I say again, I think it's based on the complaint basis.
And I have an acquaintance that's close to my age and I think this bears, some conversation that during a crowded situation back in their youth, someone inappropriately touched them, her. And the person is much older now, and that has had they did not report it. They kept it to themselves, and it had such a profound effect upon this person's life throughout the 30 years or 30 something years that it's happened, to the point where, that it affects their ability to be in large crowds, because it's always on their mind. And it's important for us to understand that, as whether it be the president or leadership of this particular group, that if someone comes to us, if they think it's inappropriate, we need to move forward with it. And I know the three answers to this kind of say, the first one says, thank her for confiding you and ask her what she hopes will be the result. Respect her decision not to tell anyone else. And even the last one, tell her that Rotary has no tolerance for harassing behavior, strongly advise her to talk to local authorities, and tell her you would like to conduct an investigation so this doesn't happen again. Does anybody know if you've done the training, what the correct answer is, or do you think what the correct answer is?
I think it's number 3.
Yes, from the training, number 3 would be the correct answer, but
it leaves you hanging, because you may state the Rotary has no tolerance. You may strongly advise her, but it doesn't allow you to move forward unless she agrees. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, even if she doesn't agree, I think there's still if someone comes to us and says, well, again, this is my personal opinion. So I'm going to go back to a school, because that's what I do with most of my incidences. And if a staff member is told that if a child comes to a staff member and says this happened in the school district, they're obligated. They have to come forward. They don't have a choice. I kind of take this the same way. If this person doesn't step forward, whether they confided in me or not, I don't know if I'm obligated, because I didn't see anything in Rotary that says we're mandatory reporters, but I would feel obligated to really try to encourage this person to move forward. And even if they didn't, I would feel obligated to tell somebody. I don't know if I'm comfortable keeping that information to myself. But Rotary doesn't really answer that, whether or not.
Tim, I had the same impression. I think that once they tell you, you're gonna have to tell them, I have to go forward with this.
Well, I think our policy talks about this. In our policy, there's discussion about what could be done at the club level and what could be done at the district levels. So since she is the club president and she
No.
We are the club president.
She tells the club president.
I'm sorry. I'm the club president. So the club doesn't, anyway, I'm sorry, I misstated that, misunderstood it. But at any rate, but what I was about to say is that she doesn't want to go to the board of her club about it.
Or the authorities.
Or the authorities. So it seems to me the next thing to tell her is that that's something that needs to be reported to our committee. because our committee needs to be aware of this kind of thing. And then our committee discusses how this should be responded to. That's I think really the answer. And I don't think there's anything wrong with telling her that the investigation would be appropriate, which is in C. It says, let her know you would like to conduct an investigation. That this will be discussed among our committee. I think that's the rest of the answer there. That it's exactly the kind of thing that would come to our committee, because she said she doesn't want it to be reported to the board of her particular club.
Yeah, but I mean, what do you go to the perpetrator?
Well, that's what our committee has to discuss. I mean, these are very fact specific things. I mean, the scenario doesn't give a lot of detail.
Right.
It does say inappropriately touched.
Okay, Duncan has his hand up.
Yeah, Sharon was just trying to say something. So go ahead, Sharon.
All right, I put it in the chat. I have an HR background, and my understanding, I would assume it also applies to volunteers and Rotarians, that if someone doesn't want to move forward with a complaint, you have a human rights, at least in Ontario, Canada, you have a human rights obligation to investigate it, because if the person put in a human rights complaint and it became known that the organization didn't pursue or investigate the complaint, that organization can be liable. I think we have some lawyers in this group, so maybe they can comment on that and how that applies to this type of scenario, and with both sides of the border. But that was certainly my understanding from my background.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer on the U.S. side, and certainly, I think that the board, that our committee should discuss this kind of situation, and I do think there are. Obviously, I don't know anything about Canadian law, but on our side of the border, there's something similar, that if you become aware of this kind of issue, and the person says, no, I don't want it investigated, sometimes you have to investigate it anyway.
Right.
You can't just ignore it just because they're saying at that time they don't want it investigated. They might change their mind about whether they think it should have been investigated. So you have to look at the details of the allegation. If inappropriate touching could be a really serious allegation, depending on what particular event was alleged to have occurred. So it really depends on the details.
So it does actually in Mike's section under reporting inappropriate behavior. I didn't write the page numbers, but the first line before it gets to the A, B's, and C's, and I think it's right after the reporting inappropriate behavior picture, it does say that Rotarians, volunteers, or staff who witness or become aware of an incident that may constitute a violation of this policy shall report such information to the DAPC chairperson, a DAPC member, or a governor or president within 48 hours of witnessing or of learning of such an incident. So we can debate the legality of the word shall, but it sounds like to me that a club president's responsible for reporting that incident, even if they don't investigate it.
Right. I think it has to be reported to our committee, without a doubt.
Well, in Ontario, it can be a criminal offense.
And it does say
clear
that's a good
cut,
point.
clear cut that if it's reported, then you have to investigate.
And it does say that there's a line in here, and I turned the page already, but it does say we're subject to all local, state, and laws of the country. So they do also are in effect with this policy. All right. Well, hopefully scenario one gave us an opportunity to think and more importantly, discuss this matter. Here's a second scenario. Again, try not to read the answers yet. A female regional leader sends you, the RI director, a message that she was disrespected and defamed on social media by a governor nominee during a Rotary Institute. She wants the governor nominee to be reprimanded, ordered to apologize, investigated to determine whether he is fit for office. What do you do? Who wants to go out on a ledge and try answering this one? Nobody wants to take a shot at
I gotta say, it sounds too much like my day job.
it. Mine too. When I started getting into these scenarios, I'm like, I think I've done this before.
This comes very close to what our club had to experience in terms of a member that was going on Facebook and putting comments that were very, let's say, on the very far fringe of being inappropriate. And we looked at it and thought about it, and we actually dismissed the member from the membership. And this situation here, though, is one in which I would say that at the most right now, you have to investigate.
Well, I think it's definitely something that should come to the committee. So the three answers are: conduct an investigation in which you review the social media posts, interview the regional leader, the governor nominee, the governor-elect, the current governor, and anyone else who is involved. Letter B, contact the governor nominee and ask him to take the post down and apologize. Ask and mediate the conversation between the regional leader and the governor nominee to resolve the issue. And which one do we think is the correct answer?
I think that goes back to my original comment on the reporting. You're not supposed to do the investigation yourself. You're supposed to forward it to the committee and to the, so I go for A. I think that you have to tell everybody involved and get things moving on it.
Yeah, Mike, I thought about the same thing with this one. I think there needs to be a sub answer to the first one is, report the incident so that an investigation can be conducted in which the social media posts are interviewed and anyone that's involved is interviewed. Letter B, which says contact the governor nominee and ask him to take the post down. That's probably 10, 20 years ago. Maybe, I don't even know if it was social media was around 20 years ago, but 10 years ago, that's what, even in schools, that's what we did. We contacted the person and said, take your post down. Well, that doesn't solve the problem because they could always put more posts up.
Exactly.
And then the last one, ask to mediate a conversation with the regional leader. And that could be the follow-up. That could be the follow-up if that's what, the person who's reporting wants. That could be the follow-up, but it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, which is there needs to be an investigation conducted to whether or not there's an actual form of harassment here.
Right. And in this particular case, you've got a regional leader sending an RI director, which is above the club level. But of course, the offender is a Rotarian. So ultimately it'll get back to the club if they may be asked to dismiss, as you said, the member. But as somebody said, the member, but yeah, this is even above our pay grade. So I don't know if they have a process at the director level. I mean, you're talking about a director of the board of Rotary International. They may have their own process that would completely pass us by.
Right.
Just don't know.
And you may find out that the allegation is untrue too. So it's not up to you to make the decision. It should be up to an investigator or investigating group to make the decision.
Yeah, if the governor gets the information, then they should pass it on to us to do that. Yes. There may be more than one investigation going on.
I think we have a scenario 3, Bernie. So a male member reports to you, a club president, that he was disrespected and publicly defamed by another member at a local Rotary event that you did not attend. He asks that the person be disciplined. What is your next steps? Again, without reading the answers, what do you think we should do? this is very applicable, I think, to a lot of what we do. What do you think we should, what our response back to that person should be?
One of the things that I always treat these questions as is, let's say everybody involved was paying $500 an hour attorneys and had to pay the first 10 hours up front as a retainer against the work that would be burned through. That includes the club itself. How many people would still complain and make concerns? This is definitely within the definition of harassing behavior. You know, it goes to the dignity of a person, may call out particular demographic details. But one of the things that I get to deal with a lot in court is people who think that something's defamatory. And the only reason it's defamatory is because the victim has gone and told other people, did you know what Joe said to me? And it wasn't defamatory because it wasn't made by Joe to other people. Now, it's harassing behavior. If Joe says to me, Marcel, you're an old white guy who's a dinosaur and you got to change your ways, that is potentially harassing language. One of my concerns with all of this is just because the DAPC is a volunteer committee, are we setting ourselves up for burning through hours and hours and hours of work, where if people had to put money on the table, we wouldn't be doing it? And that's part of my concern. In this particular case, in practice, if the person disrespected went and talked to a lawyer about what is and is not defamation, there's a good chance they would be advised, well, maybe it's defamatory, but maybe it's not. Whereas unfortunately, the way our harassment policy is drafted, following the RI guidelines, we're stuck into investigations and having to burn through lots of time here.
Well, I
understand your concern, Marcel. The only thing I would say about that is I've been on this committee for many years and we've never had a complaint at all. The entire time that I've been on the committee, a complaint has never come to us.
Well, you always hope that clubs resolve their issues in an acceptable way, but we've never really gone out on the road and promoted this committee as being there to do these things either. Until this year, this committee really was inactive in that regard, Mark. Now there's a real committee with real people ready to address these kind of things. What Marcel says is very applicable.
Yeah, it could happen, Penny. I realize that. And I agree 100% with what he's saying about defamation in particular. You know, I've advised clients about defamation cases, and defamation is it's tough to prove. It's a really super technical area of the law, and you don't want to have somebody using our committee for something that's more appropriately handled by a lawyer who practices in that area. If somebody came to me now and wanted me to advise them about a defamation situation as a lawyer, I would say, sorry, I don't do that anymore, because it's a super technical area. So I do agree with you, Marcel, that we have to be careful as a committee to not allow ourselves to get pulled into situations that are above our pay grade. But that doesn't mean that we should just defer just because the word defamation is part of what someone's complaint is.
And
That's-
Marcel, I can tell you from my own experience within the school district, so we're probably 2 years ahead of clubs and organizations. So by law, we've had to have in process, at least in the United States, we had to have a process for handling, investigating, and dealing with cases of harassment within the student population, and then also within our employee population. So you have to have a policy, a committee, and we have designated civil rights compliance officers, which falls under this harassment piece. So sounds very similar to this committee and the investigated arm of it. So my initial reaction about 4 years ago when I started the hearing was what Marcel says, oh, holy crud, here we go. We're going to be spending, as administrators, we're going to be spending all of our time, investigating this kind of stuff. And investigations do take up time. But I can tell you the two things that my takeaways have been is the correct answer to this is letter B, which is say that you'll investigate and ask him to document the details, including the names of everyone who witnessed the incident, and not to jump ahead. But that's an important point, because I have found that when you hand them a piece of paper and say, here's a reporting form, document the entire incident, half of them disappear just like that, because nobody wants to put it down on paper, because it's probably frivolous, and it really is. It's really the people that have experienced an incident that is troubling to them that they go ahead and put it on paper. And again, I think the older the population, that really rings true with. Kids tend to put more on paper than adults do. And then many times the person that's the compliance officer, when they start having, let's say they do put it on paper, you have that first initial conversation with them, and when they talk it out with an adult, it doesn't even get to the investigation stage. So we've been doing this in school districts with adults that, it could be an adult with a student, could be adult with another adult, or a student with a student. And I can count on my hand 4 or 5 incidences in the last couple of years. And here's why it became important, because one of those 4 or 5 may turn out where they report it to, in our case, the state, and it turns to the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights looks at it and says, you had a process in place, you investigated it, you did X, Y, and Z, there's no findings here, and it goes away. Same thing with a court. The courts may say, listen, you have a process in place, you have a reporting, you have a committee, you did the investigation, you came up with a solution, the resolution. So why I initially had the same reaction you did, Marcel, where, oh my God, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be spending half our free time doing these kind of things. It didn't pan out in my world of education, but and I don't think it will in this world. But at least the process is there if there's something that does happen, and then we follow.
I just want to point out something that I wrote down ages ago when you people were talking to me that our club needs to have a committee on this, and it's even if it's got 2 responsibilities, and one of them is going to be proactive and the other is reactive. And in the fact that being proactive, you've got to tell all our members that this is an appropriate level of performance that we're setting the threshold at, that we're not going to be doing this anymore. And if there is, there will be these consequences. It's just like educating your kids in your district about bullying. Okay, so the next part of that is the other side, which is reactive. This is what happens, and this is how we will react. So I think it's important to have that committee, and I'm going to start suggesting that within our club. So if we can start at the club level, it'll be working.
Right, David, there's actually a policy for clubs. Did you know that? Okay, you do. Okay. Yeah, there's a policy for clubs that they can adapt that follows the district's policy.
In a lot of cases, it's in name only too.
Right. And I
Yeah,
think,
except that your club should be doing police checks and having them complete that volunteer assessment at the point of entry into the club, or if they're already Rotarians and that policy hasn't implemented, you might do it then too. You know, we did that a few years ago, and I'm sure most clubs have let it go by the wayside. But
Yeah, we do the police checks only for people that are working with youth. And that's sort of because everybody complained about the cost of it.
yeah,
Yeah, it is a little different stateside as it would be in Canada about, you know, police checks, I believe. But another part of this is the fact that every club should be providing members with training.
yeah.
Not
And I
That's
think-
why we're doing this. Yeah,
and David, I think that's an important point, you know, that there has to be the proactive part of this also. And just a point of, and I believe Bernie said it could either be a committee or at least one person who is taking the lead on it, where they're providing, you know, and the Rotary International website has, you know, when I took a look at the training and, you know, Bernie kind of led me to take a look at these scenarios. It's not something that you have to do individual. It could easily be turned into a conversation, just like we're doing right now. You know, there's a number of pieces of education on it, the policy, all sorts of things, and these scenarios are all there. It could be taken as a group. It doesn't have to be done as an individual.
So if I could jump in, I'm really worried about the board environment. And I'm really worried about the political polarization that we're seeing that's developed over the last 5 years. I have heard in board meetings currently comments to the effect of, well, you're an old white guy, of course you're going to say that. Well, but even to be called an old white guy, of course you're going to say that, is absolutely harassment. I can see, you know, we're pretty homogenous in terms of experience levels, age, etc. We're not going to diverge that much. But curiously, in other volunteer groups I've worked in, I've actually seen during number 45 and even after that, we're seeing a further splitting of political views. The current SCOTUS problem and what is anticipated to be a decision. I've got a daughter who is having knockdown, drag 'em out fights on social media right now. I can see those starting to take place in board meetings in sort of insidious manners. And my concern now becomes, I'm happy to be able to investigate and nothing comes of it and make that report. And I absolutely agree with you know, the way Tim approached it. Once you have a process and you follow it and everything, I'm just worried, are we going to be doing a lot of this activity at a club level from what we used to call debate?
yes.
That's legitimate. I mean, and I'll just say in our club, occasionally there are members whose political points of view are very different from mine, and I try to just not say anything because there is a risk of that becoming polarizing. I do think that risk is no matter whether we even had a committee or a policy on harassment, we'd still have to deal with that issue as Rotarians, frankly. You know,
I don't understand how the word political comes into the discussion of whether it's going to be harassment or not.
yeah. I don't think political discourse is same.
That's not the right. it-
And I think that it also is something that, making people aware of what harassment is, Marcel, is so important, because some of the things that are said during meetings aren't harassment. It's maybe just not a topic that should be discussed. It might not be something you really should be mentioning during a Rotary meeting, but it doesn't necessarily fall under the level of harassment. I've had to say that in, in many situations where that doesn't really hit the level, what the definition of harassment is, but it is a topic that we shouldn't be discussing during a staff meeting or during a particular, or in the classroom. It shouldn't be discussed in the classroom. I mean, that's not I don't think the purpose of Rotary is to be political in any way, unless I'm missing it.
I mean, let me give you a real life example that I'm actually living with right now. 3 months ago, the proposal was made in another association, not in Rotary, but it could easily be here. How can we track equity, diversity, and inclusion if we don't track the information? And so I propose that we start asking questions on our application forms of, do you identify as, gender and a number of other criteria. Some people on the board, a majority of the people on the board didn't want to discuss it, called the question, which I was chairing. Call the question means I take a vote. Majority rules, says Roberts. The question is called, we put it to a vote, the motion was defeated. Boom, next item. The people who proposed this were right. It was an important issue that probably should be included, but they see themselves as having been cut off for their views. Nothing political about it. It's, are we serious about EDI or not? And it's spiraled downwards in the meetings since then, to the point where we had a comment of, well, this just shows you how the patriarchy in fact dominates everything. So I'm stuck trying to figure out, was that harassment for the purposes of other language? But under our policy, if we had, and by the way, we have Rotaract groups working in universities, and they should be adopting things like this with our guidance. And they're much more at the forefront of social change than we are at the club level. This could easily happen. And so my concern, I absolutely agree. We got to make people aware of this, and we have to have a forum, and we've got to do it right. I'm just wondering, we need something in here that says on intake, we can determine that there really isn't enough there. It goes back to Tim's example of, if the forum isn't if there isn't a complaint, we don't have to go further.
I think, Marcel, you make a great point, and it's something I'm sure we'll discuss at our next committee meeting.
Yeah, and definitely that's what we have the complaint form for. So we shouldn't be hearing a complaint without it being completed. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, Marcel, more than that, he's saying that we should discuss a little more about the parameters of our committee and making some sort of, adding some statement that there may be matters that we determine are not worthy of investigation.
You need the ability to administratively dismiss a complaint at its early stages.
Okay.
That's a good point, Marcel.
Or
That's
at
a good
least
point.
have some sort of process within that where there is a complaint and you can negotiate between the parties.
You got to be careful with that, Dave, because sometimes the very fact that you allow mediation to take place or negotiation to take place means that you condone that this has to go to a complaint ultimately.
Right.
Yeah, I think I agree with
And
that.
then you're in the catch-22, aren't you?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, some things are just not appropriate. If somebody has a political dispute with some other member of the club, I think we can just say, we're not going to listen to that. we don't get involved in political disputes, period.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be an appropriate administrative dismissal. That's all. That's why I'm agreeing with Marcel. I think there are certain things that we can say that's not something we deal with as a committee.
And
No,
Marcel, as
absolutely.
you're,
There's personal opinions in that. And, you know, if I'm liberal or NDP or Republican or et cetera, that's nothing we're going to even discuss because it has nothing to do with what our purpose of the club are. And you go and vote your own. But when it comes to a decision about touching,
Although those are easy.
yeah. that's
You
all
got,
it is.
yeah, you've got something there. My concern is you need a process where you can get rid of complaints that aren't really complaints.
yep. And Marcel's example is extremely relevant to Rotary about DEI, because we do have a DEI policy either developed or in development, and it's something each individual Rotary club should be having conversations about.
Yeah.
I know there was a couple of us that attended the DEI session in the first during the first block of this training, and I'll tell you, you mentioned Rotaract. There were 5 young ladies from area Rotaracts. They actually did the presentation, and they were absolutely marvelous and did a great job. That's what I was thinking, Marcel. They should have been talking to your group. And that's who should be having the conversation with all of us about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. I'm pretty happy to report that this year, all those committees have been filled out. This one, the DEI committee, the, governance committee, are really getting some flesh on them. They have a page on the website now, and so it's happening. It's happening.
I don't know whether I'm getting blind or not, but in order to have DEI, we're going to have to encourage this introduction of diversity in the steps to equity and inclusiveness. And that's going to be all more important to have a good handle on what harassment is because we're going to be running into a situation where we have older people saying, no, look at those kids, they don't know anything. Or we're going to have situations where there's conflicts, and it's going to boil out into this sort of abuse in the protection of each other's.
Probably we should have a joint meeting at some point between our committee and the equity, diversity and inclusion committee to try.
Well, all of our committees, subcommittees, which is what we are, should be reporting to governance, and governance should at some point. And that's Rick Stern, past district governor. Rick Stern is chairing that committee. And at some point, he probably should call a meeting of everybody.
Yeah, that seems something like that. Whoever.
But am I wrong? Are we having, will it require some sort of necessity that there be more than it is the effort being put into the abuse and harassment side to it, that everybody be recognizing it, because the DEI is going to become a primary focus?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
By the way, always be careful when you refer to EDI. EDI is not a focus. It's a tool in terms of everything we do.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as, I get really worried about an EDI objective. There shouldn't be. It's just part of why we get people to pay dues as well. That is, paying dues isn't an objective of Rotary. It's just one of the things that smooths the process along.
That's right.
Yeah, it's our ability to create a safe space for all.
That's right.
So I was supposed to be answering questions, but I think we're running out of time, thankfully.
Yeah, we're going to, for those of you who can, please log back into the plenary link that was on your email. That would be the top link, because I think Lisa wants to just thank everybody and perhaps get some feedback on the sessions and how it went. Governor-elect Lisa. Okay, so if everybody has that, she's reconvening here in about 2 minutes. And then we'll all be done before noon, so.
I just want to thank everybody. This was.
Thank you. That was very
enlightening.
good. Yes.
Yeah.
Good, yeah. Thanks everyone for your participation. As I said, this is our first crack at this, so our committee did a great job, I think. And again, a lot of the information is available at the district or RI. Some great tools there. So
Right.
thanks all.
Yep. Yep, and on the district website, our page is located under committees, I think, and then governance, and then there's a drop down to abuse prevention, I think it's called, so.
Well, the last slide shows the website.
Oh, yep, it did. Thank you.
Okay,
All right, thank you, Bernie,
All
and
right.
everybody else for all your
thanks
work.
everybody.
We appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.